Welcome to the first Book Review Blitz. I'm Nikki, the Obsessive Bookseller, and for quite a while on this channel I've been staunch in my conviction that yes, I'm going to post a video review for every single book that I read because it's important to me to document my reading history. And I kept saying that, but I failed to take into account the math on how that would actually be possible. At my current rate, I'm reading about 80 books a year, and I'm posting maybe 3 book review videos a month. Yeah, there's an imbalance there. There's no way I'm going to be able to get everything out unless I went through and posted random book review videos throughout the weeks, which is plausible, but I think it would mess up my video feng shui too much. I love looking back at my history of videos and having a clear system of how I post things, a good rhythm going with that. So, where does that leave me? It leaves me with a handful of titles that I keep carrying over month to month that were okay, but weren't amazing, or I didn't have enough to say about them to warrant a full book review in place of new releases and series that are my all-time favorites. And a couple of middle book syndromes. And I don't know if I'm going to do another book review blitz in the future. I might just be a little more thoughtful on how I handle my wrap-ups and actually close out all of these during monthly wrap-ups, but we'll see. You'll have to let me know if you prefer this plus the monthly wrap-up, or if you would just like it in the monthly wrap-up. Please let me know in the comments. And I've got about 5 or 6 titles that I'd like to review in this video, and I want to film the reviews as I get them written, so I've got 3 now, and then I will probably pick up on a different day to keep filming each individual review, and we're shooting for a 2-minute rapid-fire book review for each one. Let's get started. Hey, this is a random rant, but when people say, "and without further ado," they are adding further ado, and it drives me crazy. So if you're gonna hop right in, don't say, "let's hop right in," just do it. Rant over. The Trouble with Peace by Joe Abercrombie. It's book 2 in the Age of Madness series, and the reason I don't feel compelled to do an entire review for this is because it is not the most recently released book in this series, and it's not the first book in the series, and when that happens, I tend to kind of repeat myself a little bit on my reviews, and anytime that I can sit here and gush about Joe Abercrombie, it makes me very happy. But for a middle book, I thought it was solid. I love the characters. I love any time I spend in this world with these people. Abercrombie has a very specific writing style, it's these signature scenes, and I don't want to give away exactly what they do, but there was one in here that I thought was just brilliantly done. Such a cool idea on how to write a scene and let it play out. And basically, this book just made me very angry at some of the characters and made me love a few of them even more. I like the funny ones. And there's a duo in here that, well, kind of a trio really, but that just makes me laugh every time I pick them up. Now, as far as middle books is concerned, there wasn't a whole lot of plot advancement in this one. It's a very slow burn, but the things that did happen, skyrocketed the story to the next level. And so everybody is just losing it over the final book. I'm so many months late to the party, but I'm glad I'm finally going to be able to dive into that one, hopefully next month. But yes. I get asked all the time how this particular trilogy compares to his other works. And it is, from a plot construction standpoint, it is more on par with the first trilogy, but with a lot faster plot progression and a much stronger writing voice. The standalones are still my favorites, but these are a very satisfying continuation to the series so far. Solid 4.5 out of 5 stars. All-time favorite series. Not quite my all-time favorite book of that series, but yes, worthy of high ratings. Let's look at Doors of Sleep by Tim Pratt. First book in the Journals of Saxony Delatry. Real talk, I probably wouldn't have picked this book up had it not been a book club selection. It's just slightly off my usual taste in types of stories. But, book clubs are really good for many things. One of them is reading things that you may not have read otherwise and discovering new things. So, I begrudgingly read it. And ultimately, it was just okay. I liked the first half a lot better than the second half. I think it took me about 3 days to get 50% into the novel, and then another 3 weeks to finish it. Because the beginning, he was introducing a ton of really interesting ideas, and it was like a fast paced, and I liked the characters. I liked the idea for the antagonist, and the novelty of visiting all these new worlds is pretty darn cool. And then I got to the, oh, please come help us save our magic cornucopia part, which is not integral to the plot at all. It's a complete tangent, has nothing to do with the main story, so I don't feel bad including it in this review. And that's when I started losing my enthusiasm for the story. And then it hit a point where the characters started having these lengthy existential crisis discussions, and the antagonists got ridiculous and kind of stupid, in my opinion. Now, I have read Tim Pratt's work before. The first 5 or 6 books of his Marla Mason series is one of my all-time favorite things I've ever read. I loved it so much. And then he went from Trad Published, where he had an editor, publishing house looking over his shoulder, making sure it continues to be appealing to the masses. And he kind of went wild with it. Took it in a bunch of really ridiculous directions, and I don't handle the ridiculous very well in my books. I do not find it entertaining, and that was actually one of my concerns going into this one, was that he would take things a little bit too far, and in my opinion it did. But I was still willing to go with it because I thought the basic idea was really cool. But a lot of the basic rich ideas, like visiting a different world every time you fall asleep and wake up, I think that's such a cool idea. But I think he tried to do too much within a single day. So when things started taking that weird turn in Doors of Sleep, my emotional, mental investment in the story was just kind of petered out. There were some really lengthy, preachy existential crises that the characters were discussing throughout the story, and it just slowed the pacing down to a standstill. And the villains were kind of ridiculous in their, what they were saying and how they were going about achieving their villainous goals, and I didn't buy into it. It didn't seem realistic to me. And then what capped it off is near the end, what had been presented so far in the text on what these characters were capable of doing was kind of flipped on its head, and suddenly, for convenience sake, there are a whole bunch more skills at our disposal, and it just felt so contrived. And we had a little bit of an argument in my book club about whether or not this was intentional, and I don't think it was intentional. I don't think it was because of perspective we couldn't see what this other person was really capable of. Anyway, it felt like a cop-out to me a little bit. So I really wish I'd liked it more. I probably will not be continuing the series, and I'm coming in at 2 out of 5 stars. It was just okay. One thing in its favor is I've never read anything quite like it before, so if you like really conceptual sci-fi novels that don't take themselves too seriously, so really good ideas, but then the ridiculous aspect doesn't bother you, then you might actually like this one. The first half, I love Tim Pratt's writing, his basic writing flow and style, and in a lot of cases I see a lot of smart decisions. I've read a couple of books that he annotated and kind of showed his process behind why he did certain things, and I loved that. So it's kind of weird praising an author for his creativity, but at the same time, criticizing when he takes that creativity too far. But, I mean, editing yourself in writing is half the battle, so no one gets an out. I'd like to review God's War by Cameron Hurley, first book in the Beldown Apocrypha series. It's a sci-fi trilogy, and I am glad that I went into it knowing what to expect from this author. This is a very edgy, challenge the status quo of society type of author who is not afraid to include things for the sake of shock value. And she also does not take any time to set you up in this world. You are plunked in and just left to fend for yourself and figure out what's going on. And so her novels always take a lot of extra concentration when I pick them up. And so far I've read this one and the first book in the World Breaker saga. And she has very much the same style in both novels of wildly creative world building and not a lot of explanation and very edgy writing. And speaking of world building, like this one was really wild. It's marketed as a sci-fi, but for me, initially at least, the space element is pretty non-existent at this point. They kind of reference it, but everything takes place on this very desolate planet where they derive magic from bugs, like the life energy of bugs. And that wasn't even the focus of the story. That was kind of like an afterthought added in, just kind of the structure on how the society functions. And I wanted to know more about that. There's also this war going on the periphery of the story that's really integral to the plot somehow, but never gets explored. So I would like to continue reading the series, if nothing else, than to discover more about those things. But for the focus of this specific book, it was almost all about the characters. And while I enjoyed reading about every individual character profile, I had a couple of issues with the main character, Nyx. I really liked the main character, Nyx, right from the beginning. She had a really solid character profile right out the gate. But I began to get a little dissatisfied with her as the story progressed, because she had a bunch of like seemingly random personality quirks just kind of added here and there. And I think it was in an attempt to add more depth, but like in this case, the depth wasn't achieved by seeing her growth through the different scenes. It was more like we were plunked in at the very moment in which she grows. And so there's no context to show us how she got to that point. We're just suddenly supposed to accept that, oh, she has compassion now. So it felt a little clumsy to me. And I read this with a couple of buddies, and I think I'm the one who had the most problem with it, so take it with a grain of salt. But I think her erratic personality jumps is part of what made the story feel a little disjointed, because this was a very heavily character-driven novel. Also full of a ton of action. This is wildly unlike anything I've ever read before. But between a lot of unexplored opportunities, some clunky character work, and a slightly disjointed and convoluted plot, I'm still on the fence. If it grows somewhere amazing and this was set up, I'll probably retroactively raise my rating a little bit higher, but for now I'm landing at a 3-star, and it has potential. Good morning! New day, and I have 2 more reviews to wrap up this book review blitz. I'm actually really loving the process of putting this video together because it's forcing me to prioritize actually writing a lot of these backlist reviews. I've been really good about keeping on top of writing reviews over the last couple of years, but there are always some that kind of slip through the cracks. So, first up, Charlaine Harris's Dead Until Dark. It's the first book in the Sookie Stackhouse series that the show True Bloods was based off of, and it is amazing to me how a second read of the exact same book, like plus a whole bunch of years of experience in the genre, can make all the difference. So the first time I read this one, you can see the spine is cracked on there. I actually physically read it. I gave it about a 3-star. Yeah, I was just beginning to dabble in the world of urban fantasy, so I had not read quite any of them, like hardly any of them at all. And so I had no frame of reference to tell me whether or not this one was quality. So 3 stars, liked it okay, would like to get back to it at some point. Then the show came out, and I watched the show, and it's one of those things where it's kind of hard to get back to the book when you know what the plot's going to be because you've already seen the show. And so I got tied up in other series, read so many other urban fantasies. I still have quite the list of ones to go, but yeah, got a lot of experience under my belt in the genre now. So, picking it up again, like 10 years later, I frickin' loved it. Like, I considered giving it a solid 5 stars, but I'm like, did I love it as much as I love Robin Hobb? Maybe not. So, it's funny, for an urban fantasy, solid 5 stars. And oddly, one of the differences is I switched to audio this time, and the narrator, Joanna Parker, does a brilliant job at bringing this character to life. Like that Southern, bon tonk New Orleans accent, and she's got just this like perfect amount of earnestness in her voice that really fits the character, and I thought it was awesome. And so whereas in the book I found Sookie, well, it's still the book, but when reading it physically, I found Sookie a little bit frustrating in how naive she was, and some of her quirks were perhaps more irritating than charming, but listening to it and really allowing myself to dive into this character and appreciate her for who she is, I found her absolutely delightful this time around. Because it's that slightly naive, not the brightest tool in the shed personality that really does help make her so earnest. And, you know, let's be real, you'd have to be just a little bit off of logic to get involved with vampires in this world anyway. So it's very fitting for the story. And like her character profile, she doesn't have the background to have been really learned. Look at me using weird words. So what struck me about this series is it has a much stronger mystery element than a lot of the other urban fantasies. Like, it's incredibly integral to the plot, and it's actually like a, you know, detective badge out, we're trying to figure out who did this crime type of thing. And I think my younger self found the mystery a little bit too gritty. It was a little bit too real world for me. Whereas in like some of the other ones, I mean, we're talking about like werewolves committing crimes, and you know, I can pull myself out of the dregs of society when it's a made-up creature doing the things, but when it's humans, like that's the part that gets me, and so I don't enjoy it quite as much. But this time around I must have been reading a lot of grimdark, and I'm able to handle it now, so it didn't bother me. It was actually really good. Another thing that makes this one a little different, so my friend and I were discussing this several years ago, and she said something like, yeah, those books have a lot of sex in them. And I'm like, I read the first one, I don't remember that much. I just remember like one scene. And upon the reread, that one scene that I'm remembering is like a giant chunk of the book. So yes, these have a lot more sexual content than your average urban fantasy, but that is not the focus of the story. It does not transition them into the paranormal romance category. The focus is, and the overall arc of the plot is very much on the murder mystery, on the supernatural elements, and the sex is kind of like the afterthought, which is the way I like it. The whole plot doesn't hinge on whether or not they're going to get together. The whole plot hinges on whether they catch the murderer. And that's the biggest distinction between urban fantasy and paranormal romance. So, this is a great crossover novel for people who like both elements but don't want to give up the robustness of the world building for the sexual content, and simultaneously those who like the relationship stuff but want to try other stuff that's, you know, got a little bit more to offer than just the relationship stuff. So hopefully I explained that well enough. Anyway, I can totally see how this book was adapted for a show. Like, all the ingredients were there. It was practically a TV show in my mind when I read it. Like, it was so vibrant. It was so culturally rich. I loved every moment. I can't wait to read on. I am thrilled that I finally have a new urban fantasy series to sink my teeth into, one that I'm really loving. Because I'm all caught up with Kim Harrison, I'm all caught up with Patricia Briggs, I'm all caught up with Ilona Andrews, and Jim Butcher, so yeah, this is my new one. I think it appropriate that I come in at a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. It's not on, it's like apples and oranges trying to compare it to like a Robin Hobb book, because that is such mind-blowing, rich, cultural, all of the things. Like, the immersion in that one is so heavy, and the breadth of the series is so expansive. So, like, you really can't compare the two, but at the same time, pure enjoyment factor, like, sky, through the sky, roof, whatever. So yeah, that's where I'm landing. Let's talk about The Thief Queen's Daughter by Elizabeth Hayden, book 2 in the Lost Journals of Ben Polytheme. I love it when adult fantasy and sci-fi authors take on young adult and middle grade stories. Their stories are just so much more rich and robust. because they're used to telling these expansive things with character depth, and so they translate all of that usually to their young adult stuff. And this is a middle grade series, and Elizabeth Hayden is responsible for the Symphony of Ages series, one of the most poignant and beautiful things I've ever read. Such unique world building and very non-human main characters, some of the best that I've ever read. Like very, very creatively done. This takes place in that same world on the other side of the ocean, so a little bit of different culture, but it is so much fun being able to see the societies in these different places and some of the same non-human creatures involved in these stories. And when I say non-human, they are still humanoids, so we're not talking like talking pigs or anything, like just completely different cultural upbringings and stuff, so pretty darn cool. So what I've loved about the series so far is the expansive traveling and adventure that we've gotten. There's a ton of like riddles and puzzles for these kids to solve, and a lot of fun companions and cool settings. And most of all, the way the story is written. So the premise is they found these lost journals from Ben Polypheme, and they've reconstructed the story using writings that they found from him and illustrations that they found in his journals. And so we've got like integrated all over the plot, like first-hand accounts, and then the author is supplementing the story in between to kind of build us a full picture, and it's just such a cool format. I did not enjoy this book quite as much as the first one because the adventure was more narrowly focused onto one place. I liked the expansive element, and there were other places I would like to have seen first before we ventured here, but it essentially takes place in a gated, like almost a prison marketplace where thieves reside, which is kind of a cool idea. And kudos to this author because she explored that place thoroughly. I feel like I got introduced to a ton of cool vendors, a ton of really neat magical items, and just, yeah, felt really enmeshed in this society and felt like I got to explore it to its fullest. So major kudos there. Like I've said on this channel before, I absolutely cannot stand knowing anything about the book before I dive into it, like spoilerish things. I don't even read the backs of the books before reading them usually if I can avoid it, because if I know anything about where the plot's going to go, I lose investment in it, and I end up giving them much lower ratings and sometimes DNFing altogether. The discovery process is my favorite part about reading, so I cherish that and preserve it as much as I can. But when you give the biggest reveal of the book as the title of the book, it's kind of hard to avoid. So I got to this point in the book, and I'm like, oh, big reveal! Yeah, we knew that already because your marketing department sucks. Just saying. Rant over. Anyway, this has been a magical series so far. I highly recommend it to families, people wanting to read books with their kids. It's got enough fun and adventure for the kids, but then enough robustness and interest for the adults as well. So many things for everyone. It's a really good crossover novel. And I myself will probably read it with my kids one day. And for now, I have 2 books left in the series, and it should be a testament to how much I'm enjoying them that I'm actually making time between all these like deeply important to me arcs that I have to read these in between. So, yep. Loved it. Coming in at maybe a 3 out of 5 stars, considering I think I gave the first one a 4-star, and I like this one just slightly less, but still strong. If I were a kid, 5 stars. Loved it. This is where rating books is a little hard, because my 5 stars have gone to like Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie, and Fool's Fate by Robin Hobb, Red Seas Under Red Skies by Scott Lynch. So these really deep, rich, gigantic fantasy tomes. And so giving a 3 stars to this does not indicate how good it is within its own genre of middle grade books. It indicates where I'm at with that type of storytelling. So I liked it. It was awesome. Maybe a 3.5 out of 5 stars would be more accurate. But is it on the caliber of all those other books that I love? Not quite. So, grain of salt. But within middle grade, 5 out of 5 stars. These are among the better ones that I've read for sure. So that wraps up my very first book review blitz. I'm pretty sure I mentioned it somewhere in the middle, but I'm curious to know if you made it this far, thank you. Do you like this format of rapid fire reviews for kind of the odds and ends of the reviewing? Or should I just condense it a little bit and just be more thoughtful about adding it into the end of my wrap-ups every month? This video was kind of a lot of work to put together because I had to write all the reviews for it as well, but I needed to do that anyway. So let me know what you think, and thank you so much for joining me on this blitz, and I hope to catch you next time.